weird world we find ourselves in. Asustor, the FS6712X. This is a network storage appliance. It doesn't take hard drives, doesn't take SATA SSDs. It actually has 12 M.2 NVMe bays. That's really strange. I mean, just one of these will saturate a 10 gigabit Ethernet link. This is performance rated up to 2.1 gigabytes per second, made for creators. Team Group, T-Create. These SSDs are actually not terrible on their own. They're pretty good for this use case. They're pretty good for just bulk storage in general. They're pretty good to add to multi-device adapters where you can rock 4 or 8 M.2 on a single PCIe device. And yet, this is a very, very strange product. I mean, it's a quad-core Celeron. It has 4 gigabytes of DDR4. For the other stuff that we look at on this channel, it doesn't seem like it would have enough horsepower to do anything really super interesting with this much raw storage. I've got a total of 6 Team Group M.2 that are all 1 terabyte. So this is 6 terabytes of storage. We'll have 4 or 5 terabytes of usable space by the time we're done. And it's running Asustor's software, although you can put your own software on this. You can use it as a media center. It can be completely silent. I don't know anything about Asustor's setup process, but let's take you through it and I'll give you my thoughts. I really am not sure what I'm getting myself into, but let me walk you through it and I'll give you my thoughts along the way. So the box advertises Asustor Data Master. Backup and security applications, lifestyle applications, business applications, surveillance applications. Ooh. Although flash for surveillance, generally not a good idea because flash wears out, unlike mechanical hard drives, which don't wear out exactly the same way. Supports direct on NAS editing. That right there, doing video editing directly on a network storage appliance is really what's opened up this entire market for unusual devices. And one thing that I like is Asustor taking a chance on an unconventional product, because we need more of that kind of thing. This thing does come with a 3-year warranty. It has 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2, that's 10 gigabit ports. It has an SPDIF port, and it has a 10 gigabit Ethernet port. 10 gigabit Ethernet, 1 gigabyte per second on your network, right here. Front USB, power button on the side, rear I/O, 2 USB 2.0 ports, another USB 10 gigabit port, optical SPDIF for like a stereo, hardware reset button, DC jack. In the accessory bundle, you've got only a cable retention clip and a network cable. And a very, very modest quick installation guide. No other manual or other accessories here. Our installation guide says 2280, no 2230, no 2210, no 2262, no 2242. I'm also assuming no 22110. Basically just means the only M.2 you can use in this is 110 millimeter, which is maybe not amazing because you could 3D print an adapter that will take you from the super small M.2 like you can use on the Steam Deck, or Kioxia BG5 SSDs, for example, and you could use those in here if you can get a really good deal on them. But I've got some news for you. The T-Create line from Team Group, and these are incredibly affordable, very inexpensive. We're talking, less than $50 for a 5-year warranty Team Group M.2 that's 1 terabyte. Now, in case you're thinking that you've done this kind of thing before, maybe installing an M.2 on your PS5 or something like that, generally the PS5 is going to benefit from more space and better quality M.2. In this case, it's really not going to matter very much. The bottleneck here is your 10 gigabit network port. 10 gigabit might sound fast, but that's actually only on the order of about 1 gigabyte per second. So a single M.2 is going to easily saturate the network connection. And the rest of this unit is sized around that limitation. So you get those 2 screws out, then the top comes off like so, revealing our DDR4 SODIMM slots. It is dual slots. You do get a benefit from adding a second 4 gigabyte DIMM, which Team Group would be happy to help you with. And you can see we've got another 6 slots on the top. The magic here that makes all this work are these as media interface chips. Unfortunately, our Celeron processor in this thing just doesn't have the PCIe bandwidth to do all of this natively. Instead, you're gonna need some as media chips to make that work. And like I say, this thing is sort of built knowing that the network is gonna be the limitation. So you're not gonna be able to run these M.2 at full speed anyway. Even though this is an x86 platform and you can install non-Asustor software on here, generally I don't recommend it. It's only a quad-core Celeron. You're not going to be able to run, say, ZFS on this with any appreciable speed. You're going to suffer a little bit, in other words. Now, I'm going to do something a little unusual. I think they intend for you to just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the bottom because the more easily accessible slots are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I'm preferring to put the M.2 in the top here so that in the future, if I add more M.2 to this, all I have to do is pop the bottom off. Another reason these are the ideal choice M.2 for this is because heat and power. Higher performance, higher wattage, higher power. There's no heat sink here. There's no, this is it for your cooling, this single fan. And this is going to provide adequate cooling for normal performance M.2, but is not something that I would recommend for the same kind of M.2 that you would be installing in, say, a PS5. We've got our 6 1TB Team Group T-Create SSDs, triple level cells. The best thing about them is that they're TLC storage. And our 6 bays on the back are easily accessible. I'm gonna have to take this apart again later in order to add more memory, because I really do want more than 4 GB of memory, but I'm gonna wait to do that. If you wanted a media server that is storing, 4 or 5 terabytes of media store. I mean, you could use 4 or 8 terabyte SSDs with this as well, but generally you want to buy what is the sweet spot of capacity versus price. The lowest number of terabytes per dollar, which right now is the 1 to 2 terabyte variety. That's a post beep, which means this is just a computer in a box with a whole bunch of M.2 slots. On the Asustor website, when you do the initial setup, it'll walk you through downloading the Asustor Control Center software, which will scan your network and find the device. Fortunately, you can just set it up over the network. If you know the IP address, if you're a sophisticated user, you're on Linux, you can just go to the IP address :8000 and walk through the web setup that way. In fact, if you run the Control Center software and you hit the button where it says uninitialized, it'll just take you to a web browser and you can finish the setup, which is awesome. That's how it should be. It should be in the browser. For the installation, I opted for RAID 5 with 6 disks, which means that I'm going to have about 5 terabytes of raw capacity, or 4.64 terabytes as reported by the GUI. I also opted for BTRFS over ext4. BTRFS is a file system that can also do RAID 1 and RAID 0. It can do RAID 5, but you shouldn't use BTRFS for RAID 5. Overall, I have to say that Asustor has done a really amazing job putting the software together for, let's call it the most common use case. The problem with these is that you get a little behind on the software updates, it's exposed to the internet without meaning to, it doesn't have a firewall, you don't set a password. The installer walks you through sane defaults at every step of the way. It wants you to create an Asustor account, which is to help you punch through your own firewall. They offer a service, apparently for free, that will help you connect to this from outside your network, but they want you to register. If you don't want to register, it seems to operate fine, everything except the outside network connection. But it also gives you the option to connect an email provider so that you can receive email notices from that, and it also walks you through that. Again, it's very... they put a lot of work into explaining it with as few words as possible, which is great in this age where nobody has the attention span to figure that out. So, again, this is based on Linux, and I know what's going on under the hood, but they've done a really nice job giving you a walkthrough wizard. It's like, click here, do this. Let's do this to create a network share. Okay, this is what you put in Windows to browse and connect to your network share. It's really nice to see that level of polish here. But also walking you through saying, hey, let's not expose this to the internet. Let's set a secure password. Do you need help on creating accounts and passwords so that this will be secure? This also has a built-in firewall function. Oh, and by default, you should enable account lockout so that if somebody is trying to log in over and over and over again, it will lock you out. Those are nice, hard-won quality of life improvements from a company that's got experience building these kinds of devices. They've also put a fair amount of attention to detail that's not readily apparent. Things like the brightness of the LEDs is pretty subdued because that can be distracting in a living room. But they also give you control. You can disable the LEDs through the GUI software in case while you're watching a movie, you don't want to watch the hard drive LED blinking green watching a movie with this connected to your home theater machine. Again, they've been there. They've done that. That is a little thing to look for, but that tells me that this company has a lot of experience putting polish into their products, which is appreciated. I can confirm that the file system is configured as I expected. Linux MD and then BTRFS is running on top of Linux MD. So your initial setup, it's going to do your initial RAID resync. It'll show you the status that I just did cat/proc/md stat. SSH is disabled by default. You have to enable that under the connections, under services and then terminal. And then it's like, oh yeah, you can enable SSH. You can put it on a non-standard port. You can even do the universal plug-and-play forwarding. Don't recommend that because then it's open to the internet and you do not want that. Even if it's secure today, it might not be secure tomorrow. Updates, you don't need it. This is a level of polish on this software that is unusually good for this kind of an appliance. I've ordered a lot of these kinds of appliances. This is my first one from Asustor, and I have to say that I'm pleasantly surprised by the sophistication and, let's call it, noob friendliness of the software. Again, it's a quad-core Celeron. I'm a power user. I want something that is just to the wall insane. This is not that. This does what it says on the box. It does what it says on the box well. It's reasonably secure. I could see somebody getting comfortable with the Asustor software and then not wanting to use another brand of NAS because there is that level of polish in the software. One place where I think Asustor could improve is in their App Center. When you first launch the App Center, it says, hey, which applications would you like to install? The temptation is going to be to just click to install everything, but it doesn't really tell you what everything is. Like Nextcloud, installing Nextcloud for document management. Makes a lot of sense. Could be really awesome. What's Nextcloud? Can I read more about it? Is there something that'll let me browse it? I think they could put a little bit more polish into the app browser and make it a little more interesting. For now, I generally recommend that you can just not install something unless you explicitly know what it is that it does and what you want, and not pay attention to that aspect of it. Another really impressive feature is that because this is Linux kernel 5.13, they've put the work into making sure that Intel QuickSync works, because again, it's a Celeron platform. You've got the iGPU, which is a non-trivial percentage of your compute horsepower when we're talking about a quad-core Celeron. It's piped up and connected through the whole operating system. If you install Plex Media Server, you can totally access QuickSync transcoding. What that means for you is that if you're on mobile and you're using very low bandwidth situation, but you've got your 1080p or your 4K masters media stored on this, it'll use QuickSync to transcode that to H.264 on the fly at a much lower bandwidth. And that means that you're squeezing out more CPU horsepower out of this than you would otherwise get. And it also exposes QuickSync to things other than Plex. I didn't see an easy way to install Jellyfin, for example, and it probably would require extra configuration if you wanted to use the Plex alternative Jellyfin for your media hosting. But the plumbing on the Linux side is at least there. I was also very surprised to see Portainer. Portainer is a web GUI interface to Docker, and Docker is a containerization system. This is your toe in the water of doing some really advanced things with your storage devices. And because this is all flash-based storage, and because it is relatively high performance, everything except the quad-core Celeron 2 GHz CPU, you have a first-class GUI experience with Portainer. So if you wanted to run Pi-hole, for example, which is not, as far as I can tell, supported natively, you can Google the Portainer Pi-hole setup and then have whole home ad DNS filtering, so that you're basically doing ad filtering across all of your computers without actually installing any software at the network level, because there exists a Portainer setup recipe for that. Portainer is just a very generic containerization system. You can also install Nextcloud and everything else that way. If you want to use some of that stuff that I'm describing, you're definitely going to need more than 4 gigabytes of memory though. So you want to probably go 16 gigabytes of memory, and it really stretches what this platform is capable of. Another application that I would recommend even for novices is Tailscale. Tailscale is super easy, and what it lets you do is connect all of your devices together on a private network that is not the internet. If you want to be able to access your media over the internet securely without forwarding ports or anything else that is a security nightmare, Tailscale is how you do it. And Tailscale is basically free until you get addicted and start adding a ton of devices, and then it's going to cost you a few bucks a year. But for what it does, I think it's actually worth it, and I'm actually kind of miserly, so don't listen to me. Tailscale has nothing to do with Asustor or anything like that. It's just a really amazing service that lets you get to your stuff remotely. You can install it and connect this device to your Tailscale account, and then this is a really easy way to access media, load media. It'll work on your laptop, whether you're on the internet or anywhere else. And then all of a sudden, things like your Portainer interface and Nextcloud and web docs and all of this other stuff that you might deploy on this, photos and whatever else, it's immediately accessible anywhere you are, securely over the internet from all of your devices with no port forwarding and no extra risk. And it's built right in. Other applications that let you do that is, Asustor's online account thing will let you do something kind of similar, but it's not as slick as Tailscale, let me tell you. And there's also Zero Tier I saw as an option. And there's a whole bunch of applications that they have that are under the beta section. But yeah, Tailscale is where it's at. Oh, if you are the type to sort of modify, like to muck around under the hood, you want to install OPKG because it's a Linux distro, but it's not a Linux distro. And in the App Center, the easiest way to get there is probably to install Intware, which gives you CLI package management capabilities. From there, you can install Z-Shell or Bash or FIO, which is what we used for benchmarks in this case to see how fast we could get it to run locally, even before taking into account the network, and all the other sort of off-label things that we did here. There is actually an installer for Pi-hole under all apps. It turns out you just have to give it a few minutes to load the initial app list and then it goes through. This app list is also exactly what I had in mind. The initial wizard where it's like, hey, let me set up some accounts for you, it doesn't describe what the apps are, but this interface does. So when you install this, when you get the initial pop-up, if you have the feeling of, oh, if I don't click this, I'm going to have another opportunity to do this and I don't know what these things are, just ignore it, cancel it, don't check anything, close it. This app browser makes a lot more sense because it describes the application and is a lot more along the lines of what I was expecting. So we're learning together, chat. Now I decided to try some fun and off-label creative uses with the Asustor, which included an external USB disk enclosure. This particular disk enclosure is 10 gigabit. And it's got 4 3.5-inch bays. I threw in 4 18 terabyte dual actuator hard drives. If you haven't seen our other videos on dual actuator, check those out. And to my surprise, under external devices, it was detected correctly. However, it wouldn't let me set up a volume or RAID or anything like that. I can do that from the command line, but I'm gonna have to use that O package command and install more command line utilities. You can create a RAID array from the command line, but there is no way to do it from the GUI. It also doesn't show external disks in the storage manager, but you can set up backups to back up to an external USB disk. Making use of this as a media server, it's kind of a two-step process. Understand that the HDMI out is different than the applications that are installed. Just because you install Plex doesn't mean that it's automatically going to know or be able to use the HDMI output. Most of the time, you have what's called a universal plug-and-play or a DLNA media server. Like when you get a Chromecast or an Apple TV, you plug it into your network and you plug your TV into that, and then it just shows up on the network and advertises. This doesn't do that out of the box. The application that Asustor provides to do that is called Asustor Portal, and it's decent, but there are other applications you can install to get a little different functionality, and sometimes the wording on the applications you install is different, because if you just search for media player or cast, you'll find applications that let you cast from a web browser to something else on the network, when really you want to run the application on the actual Asustor device itself. By default, this is the UI that you get when you install the Asustor Portal, Firefox, Netflix, YouTube, and then ADM. It's a little more work to use it as a Chromecast destination, so you can just go to cast ... in Chrome, which they'd make the installation of that a little easier, but it is doable. So there you go, that's a quick look at the FS6712X. Now, you can install another operating system on this. It is, after all, basically a PC. It's got a little bit of built-in storage for its own operating system, and then its operating system sort of takes over a little chunk of your SSDs. But I don't really recommend that. If you're gonna go that off-label, you should roll your own device. This is good for what it is. It really is. This is also a really surprisingly competent, if you just wanted to, say, get an elderly relative or grandparents or something, their own private Netflix machine that is basically bulletproof and they can knock over and is not going to have any physical problems. The only real downside is capacity because it's flash based, but you can load it with all kinds of media from the Internet Archive, old episodes of The Dick Van Dyke Show and I Love Lucy and Green Acres and whatever else, and it will all sort of run in a self-contained manner. You can plug it in with HDMI, you can control it from a mobile phone. You can even set them up with Home Assistant and fun things like that. Home Assistant is for home automation. You can tie that in with HomeKit on the Apple side, or Lutron Cassetta, or Zigbee and Z-Wave things, although you'll need a little USB dongle in order to be able to send and receive Z-Wave and Zigbee wireless signals. But you can do all sorts of fun things like that with this platform without taxing it too much. Just remember, at the end of the day, quad-core Celeron, 2 gigahertz, non-upgradable CPU, but it is whisper quiet. The memory is upgradable, 8 or 16 gigabytes of memory, costs less than a pizza, and having more memory to work with means that you've got a little bit more performance and a little bit bigger working set if you do go the Docker, Portainer, Nextcloud, self-hosted documents, Tailscale route with this platform. Pretty much the only thing that I don't really recommend is using it for a surveillance platform unless you use USB hard disks. In terms of backing up and restoring this, you can do that with a USB hard disk. That works really well. You can also back it up over the network. You can back it up with SMB. Asustor gives you some online options, but those are software exploration tasks, and I've run out of time for this video. I'm Wendell, this is level 1. Overall, the FS6712X, it's an unusual product. M.2 flash storage often doesn't make a lot of sense for this use case, but M.2 storage is not significantly more expensive than any other kind of storage, and 1 or 2 terabyte drives with 12 slots is certainly unique in the market. It's a niche product, but for that niche, it's actually pretty good. I'm Wendell, this is level 1. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the level 1 forums.